Okay, hello everyone. We're back to Winning with No-Till, and today I'm down in Campden, Ontario, in Niagara Region with Larry Dyck and family, who run a multiple crop farm on some interesting soils and topographies, and we're going to talk about how the system has evolved over the years and where you're planning to go in the future. So Larry, we're going to start with sort of just describe the farm. What's the history and the journey to no-till and your green planting and that? Where did you come from and to get to the point of where we are today?
Well, the farm is at this point just mixed grain. We used to be in livestock as well. When I bought Dad out in the mid-'80s, we were a full conventional system. And since then, we played with some no-till corn back in the late 80s, had some not positive experiences, didn't know how to come out of them, so went back into a full tillage system. By the mid-90s, we'd bought a no-till drill. We were growing soys as well. And so from that point to this point, we were full no-till on soys and wheat. The corn was still a conventional system up until, probably 2012, 2013, we were looking at moving to a stale seed bed when we heard Ray Archuleta speak in Guelph, and he talked about incorporating cover crops and forage crops into row crops, and that really grabbed a hold of us. And so, but 2015, 2016, we moved quite aggressively, more aggressively than I anticipated, into plant green and full no-till. So, that's kind of where we're at. I farm together with my son, Ben, who's a very active participant, and I really appreciate his help. Both Ben's and my wives are actively involved in terms of logistics and helping in all the difficult to describe ways that make these places fly.
And so just carrying on, describe the farm. What are the crops that you're growing? What are your soil types and the slopes that you have to farm with?
Some of our soil has fairly decent slopes. Other of it is quite level. One of the realities of our soil is it's really fragile in the wintertime. And so that's when bare soil on a slope can develop all kinds of rill erosion and chew some really deep rills. And so that too is one of the things that has kept us away from trying strip till, that on those slopes, those strips could wash right out. Our crop mix is varied. We've discovered at least in the Niagara Peninsula, maintaining a rotation can be a challenge, just looking back over years. For example, 2021, we got no winter wheat in, so what do? So at this point in time, we're growing buckwheat, sunflowers, soys, IP. The soys are IP, corn, and winter wheat. We've had some other things in the mix, and we're going to try some canola this year.
Winter or spring?
Winter.
And last year I think was your first year with sunflowers, right? And you had 300 or 400 acres and did well with them.
Yeah. There is no crop that is a miracle crop, but I see value in rotation.
And what about the soil types?
Heavy clay, Haldeman clay, in all its glory.
So you don't have any sort of lighter ground at all, really?
I won't say that. Towards St. Catharines, it's how the glaciers dropped it. We'll have a farm that on one end they can almost grow peaches on, and on the other end it's ugly, and it can move that within a couple 100 feet. So we have pockets of nice soil.
Back in December, Larry, when we were together with Mike Balin and Henry Donater, we kind of talked about each farmer's philosophy of why they were doing what they were in terms of farming. What's your philosophy? Why do you make the choices that you make? Is it simply for profit, or is there sort of a greater public good and environmental aspect to it as well?
Well, profit has to be a huge part of it, but I'm not sure that this conversation is valid to talk about profit versus not profit, because we are growing crops, we are paying bills, we are doing what we need to do. And I realize that our yield trials, all of that, we dial right in on this or that or the other makes a major difference. But there's huge variation in all kinds of things. So what has pushed us into this is certainly a labor thing. Instead of having to figure out how to get 2 or 3 tillage passes in, the planter is the first implement that rolls, and then the sprayer behind that. The soil is something that needs to be protected and nurtured, and we were unhappy with how our ground was working on a conventional basis, and that's really what pushed us into even the idea of stale seed bed. And so when we heard about this plant green thing, it made sense. In spite of the ramifications and the challenges, it still made sense. The idea of essentially, I want my cover crop roots to do what we used to do with tillage.
And when you and I first hooked up, it was because you were sort of exploring biostrips a little bit, which is something that I was really keen on. But you found that the green planting through a mixed recipe of cover crops is just as effective for you as trying to segment that.
I won't say it's just as effective. I mean, I don't know where we'll be in 5 years. Nothing has been written off. Plant green is simpler. Trying to marry the GPS paths, and other guys maybe have it figured out. We have in the sunflowers, we have a cover crop interseeded. And so when we put corn in next year, that will make a biostrip. I certainly haven't written biostrips off. At this point, it's simpler. If we can make the plant green thing work, it is simpler. One concern I have with the biostrips, and I'm not sure whether it's valid, is that strip being bare is going to act differently than when we're planting into green. We know that when we plant through a cover crop, our moisture level is not, our moistures in the top 6 inches are not stratified. But we find when we move into bare areas, and it can be even fairly close, that the moisture can begin to stratify.
There's a lot of anxiety out there about that concept with people, right? And so maybe just talk a little bit about your experience there in terms of how you've continued to explore that avenue.
The first year, even the first couple of years we did it, I was scared stiff. And since then, I've moved to define it as cautiously trepidatious. It's so different. The idea of, from Clarence Swanton's work and all that work, the concept of moving into something completely green, what kind of stress are we putting on the plant? The flip side of that is I know that with our present planter, we probably could plant into the driveway. It's bare, but it's so hard, you won't expect a plant to do anything. So as I look at the plant green thing, I look at it as part of a system. We realize that when we plant, in every scenario, there's positives and there's negatives on each seed in its individual form. If I can improve the soil health, the soil environment, can I give the seed a better environment to start in, even though there is this negative of crop roots around it?
And so, how many years have you been doing this now? Half a dozen?
Yeah, since 2016 was our first year, so we're moving into year 8, I guess.
And is the management of it becoming more like you anticipate what you need to be managing as the season sort of starts and gets going?
Yeah, it's not as scary. In fact, it's 2 years ago we did some conventional planting for a neighbor, and that felt weird. How do we set this planter up now?
Yeah, interesting. Why are you there? Like, are there specific aspects of it? Is it a cost? Is it equipment? Is it time? Is it labor? Is it, your sort of interest in soil health? Or is it all of those things? What are the sort of main factors of why you've sort of gone down this route?
It's all of the above. I mean, initially when we moved into the no-till soys and wheat, it was, well, if we don't have to work it 2 or 3 or 4 times to get a seed bed, if we can plant without doing all that, that's a win just from the time and the labor. All of that went into it. The largest thing now is we're making it work, and I can't see a reason to change. And especially from the aspect of the soil.
Can you see, or do you have tests of a discernible difference in the soil health in the time that you've been transitioning to this system?
I don't have tests, and that's one of the challenges. But we're able to plant as soon as anybody else, and our crop yields are solid. So again, it comes into this big picture thing. Somebody else's might look a little better. In the end, we have to be able to pay our bills, and as long as we can pay our bills, that's a win.
It's interesting, and I can't remember who it was, but in the last week or two, somebody said to me, it really doesn't matter what the crop looks like until harvest day. That's the only day that it really matters, right? And yet we seem to get so fixated on, no-till soybeans look terrible, a month after emergence type of thing.
And yet, come harvest time, it's not too often that the no-till soys are any worse. And in the end, our bank account is not determined by how well the crop looks, but how well it yields and what it costs us to get there. We've never farmed in history the way we farm today. And so what will our soils look like in 20, 30, 40 years if we continue to lose topsoil?
We're caught in agriculture in these paradigms, and how do we break out of those and recognize what is the right? Because your right is maybe different than my right.
I was chatting with someone just this morning, and I said, if we were to pull a tillage implement into something that's been cover cropped and no-tilled for 8 or 10 years, the next year the crop would be through the roof. And so that's a short-term gain, but within a year to 2 years, we've wiped out everything, and we're back to where we were with soil running down the slopes and ditches eroding.
So in the current system, can you just talk about, is there tillage in the system at all? So like Henry Donater was down there a week ago, and there is tillage in that system because he was worried about nutrient stratification and things like that. Where is your farm these days in terms of, is there tillage in the system? And if so, when and where?
The only place it is if we're bringing new ground in. We might work a little bit of wheat stubble, I think a 6-acre chunk that came out of abandoned orchard 3 years ago. And, we got it level, but then some things have continued to settle. So we still have a full line of tillage equipment. It suits me just fine not to hook on it. So it's there, but...
So what implements are part of the inventory that make the no-till system work? So this is getting to the fact of, how many implements do you really need to make no-till work versus some of these other systems?
Well, so we have a corn planter, a seed drill, and an interseeder. And if we weren't in cover crops, I wouldn't need the interseeder. But we're seeing the benefit there. So those are the 3 planting implements, a sprayer, and then the harvesting equipment. Combine, we do have a self-propelled windrower. We find that works nicest for the buckwheat.
And so in terms of the number of tractors that you need to run the operation in this scenario versus if you were tilling, how big a difference would that be?
We still have the same tractors because, again, they were paid for. One spends some time in the fall on the auger cart. The second big one just got hooked to the Avatar this year. There's one older unit that you might see that ran the John Deere air seeder. It's at 12,000 hours, and it's still here. It might get sold. I don't know. We're probably over tractored, but the newest one is an O2, so the value, although used equipment has high value, so we didn't downsize any of that.
You could have, but because it was here and it was paid for, and you mightn't put it into use, it's still here.
The one that's on the corn planter, again, if it went down, there's a second one here that could jump on it. And so for us, that's a cheap insurance.
Gotcha. Okay. So in terms of making the system work, things like, equipment maintenance, residue management, what's happening at the back end of this unit to set you up for the other things you want to do, crop rotation, cover crops, all that type of thing. is it all of those are as important as each other, or are there some of those things that are sort of the more important?
I think they're all important. The equipment maintenance, everything gets a very thorough going over every year, especially the corn planter and the air drill. Those openers, those bearings, you know, the interseeder doesn't work very hard because it's only going in the ground a half inch and doesn't seem to take a lot of abuse. And this concept of having a cover crop growing and what that does to the moisture in the soil, the evapotranspiration, is that the right word? Like all that stuff was simply shocking to see how that works. And so, yes, I mean, we spread the residue as well as we can. You know, wind impacts, especially this machine with a single spreader. The wind can impact how that straw spreads if it's a crosswind. If we're dead calm, yeah, we can get full width. But if I plant a green cover crop in there and it's got all year to go, and then when we come along in the springtime, the wheat stubble that's there, I guess my theory is that the cover crop, once it's up to the height of the stubble, keeps things more moist and aids in breakdown. It's still there, but it's just not an issue when we come to planting. It's brittle, and then the green cuts like butter. Like if it's dead or dying, it's really difficult to cut, and hairpinning and all that stuff. But if it's green, it is like taking a knife and slicing through soft butter.
A lot of people, when they're talking about no-till, sort of emphasize how important the planter is. You guys have made some pretty big investments in equipping the farm with the right planter equipment. You know, is that the place to start, is making sure you got a planter that's going to be able to do this?
Yes, but it doesn't have to be a new planter. I would say my soils dictated what we switched to. It's all important. Yes, the planter is important because if the seed isn't in the right place, you know, we know from a corn, if the corn's at 1.25 inches, it's not going to do as well as if it's at 2 inches or deeper, just the whole root development system. But it doesn't have to be a new planter because we arrived at ours over a period of time and based on our soils.
Again, there's a lot of angst out there of others people wanting to, or, you know, thinking I can never go there. But so can you talk to the hurdles a little bit? Things that we hear all the time are fertilizer stratification and just fertilizer management in general. You know, has that been a hurdle? Or is there anything else like delayed planting because the soils are wet and that, which you're managing with the green material, which is essentially creating the management of that water table and stuff like that? Are there any specific hurdles that you guys have come up against that you've had to learn to manage and that might be things that other people need to be concerned about?
One of the interesting hurdles we're navigating is some weed control struggles. So we've got a weed like wild carrot, but we're not the only ones struggling with it. That's getting to be quite a common weed on the harder soils. And I'm trying to figure out, are there things that we can do culturally? If I went in and worked the ground aggressively, I could deal with the wild carrot, but then, you know, it's this trade-off. So some of those weeds that might be deemed no-till weeds, but again, if I worked everything, there's weeds as well, because tillage generates its own weed spectrum. So it's not a massive hurdle, it's there. The interseeding has been a huge learning curve. We've made lots of mistakes and had lots of less than positive outcomes. So trying to figure out how to get a consistent stand on the interseeding and what that will be to plant into is we're still working at that. I think we've got, well, with all the rain we've had, most of the interseeding is doing quite well, and we'll get a better handle on that as we harvest. But
so how do you manage the corn harvest vis-a-vis the residue? Is that standing? Is it chopped? Like what's your target for?
The more I can leave standing, the better. We do have a Geringhoff head. It's a non-chopping head. The reason we have a Geringhoff head is our road issues, because it's a folding head. And I do not want a chopping head. I love the old deer heads for the way they leave the residue. Like, you have no problem leaving residue 2.5 feet tall. It's beautiful to plant into. The Geringhoff has got a knife roll, but we've got it as unaggressive and backed off as far as we can because I really want, I'm leaving the residue. I don't need the wind to pick it up and blow it away. And I would like as much stock standing as we can get.
Because you don't want a mat of residue.
I don't want a matted residue.
Yeah, whether it's your clay soils or any soils, you don't want that
a matted residue.
Okay. Relative to your neighbors and sort of county averages and stuff like that, is there any place where you think you're losing with your system compared to what your neighbors are doing with the true and try conventional?
I don't think so. The conversations around yields are huge all the time. And again, I don't know whether my yields are best. We've done some variety plots and some of those are down from some of the other variety plots. But we're still learning and adapting and changing, and we're still here. It comes back to this mindset thing. Without taking too big a sidebar, we're involved in things like the Canadian Food Grains Bank. So acres go there. Does that impact whether my family eats or not? No. If we're a couple of bushel down on our corn yields from somebody else, I don't know. How do we define a win? Well, we're still here.
It's funny because sort of the common metric is yield, but yield is sort of meaningless relative to the profitability per acre type of thing. But it seems like our bank accounts are verboten in terms of talking to, but it's okay to brag about our yields at the coffee shop.
Well, it's interesting. I have two local farmers, colleagues. They grew the same, this is going back a couple of years, they grew the same variety of beans, similar acres, similar locations. One guy threw the kitchen sink at it, the other guy didn't. They had the same yield at the end. And the one guy said, and I spent X number of dollars more than you did, and we wound up with the same yield. You talked about nutrient stratification. That's a whole nother conversation when we get into nutrients. We'll broadcast potash if we need it. Our phosphorus, at this point, we're all a full liquid system. And so it's pop-ups on the planter, and and we've been that way for 30 plus years and aren't noticing diminishing again.
So then where are you winning? Why are you doing this? Is it strictly financial? Is it the soil? What is the reason that you guys continue to pursue this avenue?
Don't find a reason to change. I haven't found a reason to change. The reality is, I think we have to figure out how to stop soil loss. I mean, Lake Erie shows it and gets, program money because it shows it. But does it mean that there aren't nutrients and soil flowing into Lake Huron or Lake Ontario? No. I've got Jordan Harbor right near me, and it's brown year round, and you see how far out into Lake Ontario that goes, and then it drops. Do we have the social license? I won't even get into that. If we're losing soil, we're losing nutrients that we have paid for.
And biology.
And biology. And why are we reluctant to venture into the conversation that says, could we maybe do things differently?
To keep that in place.
To keep that in place and still pay bills. So,
I think this is an easy question. Based on where you are today, would you ever go back?
I don't know why. From a workload specifically, right now, if I was in a tilled system, I'd have to make a couple of passes with the tillage before we could walk through and plant a cover. Now, as soon as the ground is fit, we're ready to roll.
You've evolved quite a bit in the last, say, 10 years. Is there more plans to keep evolving that system, or have you got to sort of a state of that you're comfortable with?
No, the real interesting thing for us is the whole areas of biology, and what does that do? How does that determine nutrients? And is it a biology that we need to purchase? Is it a biology we can grow in-house? We have some of those experiments on the go now. So that's probably, and that's as unknown an area as comparing no-till to till. Well,
and so I'm sort of the philosophy that prior to World War II, we were the physics era. Everything was done with tillage and implements, and then we got into the chemical era, and now we're sort of moving into the biological era. but it's really complex, and the opportunities for permutations and combinations are almost endless, and so it's a huge amount of work to work our way through that.
And we know so little about the biology. Dr. Laurie Phillips said last winter, we know about 30% of what we see. And so how much don't we see? But even of what we see, we only know 30%. So yeah, that's exciting. It's exciting stuff. And so can we begin to supply more and more nutrients? Like again, if when we apply a dry phosphorus, only 10% of that is available to the plants. The other day in the Better Farming magazine, 2/3 of a crop's nitrogen needs are coming from the soil. So we place a lot of emphasis every winter on phosphorus and nitrogen. There's a lot of room for learning. and seeing what the next steps are.
Sounds great. Any advice to others on how to start the type of journey that you guys have taken?
To be willing to start, and even with what you have, take whatever you could afford to lose, be it 1 acre or 5 acres. If you can afford to experiment on that, and even if you want to put it at the back of the farm to see what's involved in, even if mid-July you say forget it and go with a batwing mower, you still learned something, and whether you carry on the next year, another evolution that really intrigues me. I heard last winter we might within 5-6 years have light bars that can do a lot of termination for us on the front of our planter, which would be stunning. A couple of years ago, they were actively working on a steam system out of Saskatchewan. I haven't heard any more about that, but I'd be gangbusters for that.
Neat. So that brings us to the end, Larry. And so on behalf of those that will have the opportunity to view this seminar, I just want to thank you and family for letting me sort of wander around with you and learn from you and with you. And thank you for taking the time to chat about your system here today.
It's been a privilege.